Meistri, or Master's Crac, is a route that was first ascended by James McAfee in 2022. It's in the Llanberis slate quarries, which are just on the other side of the Llanberis Pass in North Wales to the famous Norway slate quarries. It's a very technical slate slab, which is quite normal for this part of the world, but what makes this route especially unusual is that it's all protected by trad gear. Starting the route feels a bit like a slap in the face, because basically the crux of the entire route comes right off the floor, and because it's climbing on slate, that means pulling on some tiny sharp little holds. It's a pretty intense boulder problem. It's protected by 3 pitons, which you're pretty happy with because you don't have to place gear, but at the same time unhappy with because you've no idea how good they actually are. When you get to the end of the first 5 or 6 really intense moves, you get a fairly decent hold, which I'm just grabbing here, which allows you to have a quick breather, but not really stop, because at this point you're quite far above these pegs and there's a really sharp spiky rock on the floor and you really need to get some gear in. So here you can see I'm fiddling in that gear right now, trying to place it as quick as possible because you're really not in a nice position. You then do another couple of skatey moves up with your feet. You don't change the handhold, you just take it in a slightly different way. Place another piece of gear and then start the final awkward sequence, which is going to get you to the first real rest of the route. On slate climbs, most of the rests come in the form of good footholds rather than good handholds. So like right now, my foot is in the handhold that signified the end of the hard climbing on the boulder problem, but until I've got my foot in it, I can't actually really rest. From this point onwards, the route eases up quite significantly, and you're going to do a series of fairly straightforward boulder problems once you know what the sequence is and where the holds are. But it's a rock type that really takes no prisoners. If you get a foot in the wrong place or a hand in the wrong place, or you take a hold in the wrong order, there's no real way of correcting it. You very quickly get completely stuck. And what's interesting about the slate is that you can have an impossible feeling move leading into a practical no hands rest, and you just kind of flip-flop between these two different states most of the way up the climb. A few meters above my head you can see a large portion of the crack, and this is basically the main respite point in the route, what I'm really aiming for. And this portion of climbing is a great example of how slate climbing can go from feeling really easy and quite controlled to completely out of control depending on which method you take. Trying to climb this crack on the right hand side feels absolutely desperate, so bouncy, so easy to fall off, but if you switch around to the left hand side via a really uncomfortable move, climbing the next climbing sequence is actually quite straightforward. So once you get to this point here, I've sped it up because there was a lot of resting, a lot of shaking out. You place quite a lot of pieces of gear. There's no point at this route where I would say it's actually bold or dangerous, but at the same time the slate in this part of the valley is notoriously quite soft, and so you want to place as many pieces of gear as you can to, well, just limit the chance of something pulling out and you going for a bit of a long ride. Having said that, you don't want to place too much because any pieces of gear you want to place you have to carry up there with you. So it's this real interesting compromise to take. The last part of the route really changes gear again. The climbing becomes hard, and what's interesting is instead of being this constant boulder problem, reasonable rest, boulder problem, reasonable rest, you're going to climb 3 boulder problems back to back with basically no rest between them. When the climbing gets so intense like this, I prefer not to place gear because placing gear just means breaking up that sequence, breaking up that flow. So I'd minimise the gear I wanted to place in this section and also decided to place a nut rather than a friend, which is going to be slightly quicker to place. This sequence is actually really interesting because there was 2 distinct possibilities. There was a less physical but far more technical way and a more basic, simple physical way. In the end I chose the physical way because I felt even though it was more tiring, I had more chance to actually control the climbing. Although the technical method felt objectively easier, there were a couple of moves that I knew I could slip almost any time, and I didn't want to leave that to chance, having invested all that energy to climb the first part of the route. Doing something a little harder but a little bit more certain felt like a really good bet to me. The last couple of moves actually felt amazing. I was a little bit more tired than I'd hoped I'd be up here, but with enough in the tank to know that I could do it. I really like that feeling when you're climbing. By this point I was quite run out from the last piece of gear, and it feels like an incredibly freeing place to be. You've only got one thing to think about, and that's going to the top. From this point onwards, everything gets much easier again. A couple of easy moves, a little bit of gear, and then a few really easy meters to the top of the crag. Cheers James for putting it up. What a route.